thanks and support and just what a fabulous job you did, Walt, last year as our vice chair. Walt very reluctantly and graciously agreed to step into the role last year when we had some attrition, and just did a bang-up, marvelous job of it. And I'm so grateful for his work. And I'm delighted to tell you that for this year, Chris has been appointed by the board, and just so delighted to partner with you going forward. And I'm sure that Walt and Chris will have a lot of opportunity to collaborate and do a handoff.
Absolutely.
On the EEO Advisory Commission. So congrats to you, Chris, and thank you for stepping up, and so grateful for all your work, Walt. Okay, couple of items on the schedule. We have, as you guys will recall, we've designated April, July, and December as our all virtual meetings. The rest of them are all going to be hybrid, but we need to have a quorum in the room to be able to conduct business. This is going to be critically important for February because we have our appeal. Now, the complainant can certainly appear by teams if they choose to, but I think it's going to be really important for our deliberations if we can be in the room together. And if the complainant decides to show up in person, I think it would be a much more easy process for question and answer if we can all be in the room. So to the extent you can do it, if you can be here in person for February, that'd be great. I will tell you historically, on the evenings that we have appeals, it tends to be a longer meeting, right? I mean, we could be in session with the complainant for 45 minutes to an hour, and we could be deliberating for a half, 45, potentially even longer, depending on what the facts and the circumstances are. So just want to make sure, if folks are going to be in the room, it probably will be a little bit of a longer meeting. In a few minutes, we'll talk a little bit in executive session. Hi, Roland. Happy New Year. We'll talk a little bit in executive session about the materials that have been sent for the particular appeal, just so that we can prepare ourselves. And because we're going to be talking about a particular individual, we'll do that under executive session. But just going through the schedule, and Roland, I'm just reminding on what's virtual and what isn't. So April, July, December are virtual. The rest are going to be in person with an appeal next month, February.
So is the appeal itself in open session?
It is not.
So it's not just the executive session for the deliberations. The whole thing is
correct, because there's there could be medical or personal confidential information that's disclosed. So both the deliberations as well as the presentation will be under executive session, as it will be when we hear the background materials, so that we know what we need to request in advance. The other point I have on the schedule is that we have nailed the affirmative action plan vendor to come in and be with us well, they will be remote, but it will be during one of our in-person meetings in May. And I understand, Anna, of course, correct me if I have this wrong, but I think what they're going to be doing is giving us sort of the same presentation that they've given to the workforce in terms of understanding what the obligation is with respect to affirmative action plans, best practices around it, and then I think some of the information about our plan. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm told from Gurjeet and the vendor that is also going to be a lengthy meeting, probably an hour and 15 before Q&A. And knowing our group, there's usually robust Q&A on this topic, in addition to whatever business we need to conduct. So, just allocate a little bit more time for May and for February. Before we shift into executive session, hi Fatima, Happy New Year.
It took me a while to find it.
No worries. Come on in and join us. We'll get you up to speed in a second.
Okay.
The other point on the chair update before we shift into executive session to talk about the appeal is what's coming up next week. Now, I've sent to you guys an email that came through from Bryna, who is, I think, in the communications office. There is going to be a meeting of all of the chairs to talk just about the budgeting process in general. So I will attend for us, and I'll report out what that is. But in the invitation, there's an opportunity to give feedback and insight in real time to the extent we have it. And then there's going to be another opportunity for one of us to appear and testify before the board in March for the budget session. So, one, love for you all to be thinking about what are important initiatives for us to daylight from a budget perspective. I went back and I looked at what we did and what we talked about to the board last year in March. And at that point, it was workflow of the office with Anna and Gurjeet, and I'm remiss for not having said this at the outset of the call. We have Juan Torres here, who is the new investigator to the office, who was so requited for so many years, and we're just so delighted that you're here. But on the budget point, it was really around allocating budget for Juan, the requisition for Juan's role, right? So obviously that was successful. Juan's in the seat. We talked a little bit about allocating additional budget to implement the recommendations from the affirmative action plan. And so Anna and Gurjeet, maybe in February, we can get a little bit of a readout on the executive director's report around how that works and maybe what else we need so that we can be thinking about that for March. And then we talked a little bit about a little bit more budget to be allocated to deploying resources around implementing best practices with some of our housing initiatives that the landlord, you served on the landlord tenant?
I still do, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So you guys pushed the initiative of wanting to have something at the county level that was more closely akin to what the state regime was and the enforcement investigative process in that regard. And we supported that in what we talked about from a budget perspective. I don't have a line of sight on whether, I mean, that relates to the ordinance work we're doing for sure, but do you have a line of sight on that from a landlord tenant perspective?
I don't. We had a meeting yesterday, and we also talked about the budget process as well. And so David Tim, our chair, will be at the meeting as well, but I do not have visibility on that. That predated my time on the committee.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's what you're talking about, but we used to push for the budget, and every few years we get some of a contract with an outside vendor to do testing on discrimination in housing, and then they write a report. Is that what you're talking about, or is that something else?
I think it certainly could be what we're talking about.
I didn't know if that was.
I don't think
no,
because I think the discrimination testing, I think it's typically budgeted.
Oh, it is.
It wasn't a new.
Well, we did a barrier analysis, I think, in employment for the Arlington County workforce. Is that right, Roland?
Yeah.
That was the scope of the barrier analysis?
But I think the housing survey is automatically in the budget. The thing about that, and Anna, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's done every other year.
Yeah.
So because it's done every other year, it will be it's in the budget and every year, but it may be deleted out of the budget depending on whether it's the year that
To do it or not, yeah.
So that money is automatically put into the budget, and the question then is if they're going to do it that year, it's taken out. I forgot the process.
And I believe during COVID there wasn't testing, and I think when I was getting ready to join this commission, I had some conversations where the intent was to begin testing again post-COVID, and so I hope that that's budgeted for and it'll be acted upon this year.
Yeah,
but I think
there's a different, also there's a different vendor, because I remember Gurjeet was not pleased, and neither was I, when you saw the report that vendor that they've been using for years. So as a result of that, I think a decision was made to get rid of that vendor, and it's a new vendor now. COVID happened,
yeah.
So I don't think they were able to do anything because of COVID.
But it sounds like this is still something that we can flag as an issue of importance for us, even if it's earmarked, that we want to make sure that it's utilized and deployed. But I think to answer Stefan's question, what we talked about last year was a little bit different than that. It was, I think, Chris, course correct me here, it was a little bit more robust training, both for the Office of Human Rights as well as perhaps other resources within HR to be better situated to do housing investigations. And I think there's like a HUD training program.
I think so, yeah.
And it's robust. And it was designed to enable the office to better handle these complaints, better understand the issues, and it would be an investment of time. And so we expressed support of that, and that was quite consistent with some of the edits we were proposing in the ordinance, source of funds, and some of the other issues. So the ask for all of you we don't have to align on it now. I mean, I'll read out in February what I hear next Tuesday. But if y'all could put some thought into what are topics of importance for us that we want to be highlighting at the budget testimony in March. And one of the things that came to mind, I'm just putting it out here for discussion purposes, because we've talked about this before over the years, about accessibility of the materials on our website and translated into multiple different languages, right? And I don't think we've ever allocated or deployed budget to do that. In the spirit of outreach to different communities, we can figure out what are the top 5 for languages that are prevalent in Arlington County and maybe expend some funds to do translation so that you can see it in multiple different languages.
But if we do that, don't we need translation on the staffing end, that if something comes in, that there's an ability to communicate with that person?
Absolutely, and I think we have interpreter services just like.
Oh, that's already in the budget?
Yeah, we have.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it's, you know, from our perspective, daylighting the concept of what we want the board to be thinking about and researching and you know, just deploying resources to figure out what we can do.
I just because of we had this conversation yesterday in tenant landlord, I'll also flag for folks that the board anticipates a $35 million gap in anticipated revenues to expenditures, so a deficit at this point of 35 million. So we talked last night about encouraging individuals to utilize the online participation form for the budget process, in addition to making sure as the tenant landlord commission we are going to participate in the cycle. And so I think there will be some tough choices. And so I think to the extent that we want to make sure that budget priorities that we see as important, both institutionally but individually, to take advantage of the opportunities. And the second thing I'll say is that, which is slightly related to our work, but not mentioned directly in point, the county board did identify further implementation of equity initiatives countywide as in their directive resolution to the county manager to prioritize or try to prioritize equity initiatives and implementation of the equity resolution. So I think it'll be a tough budget year, and so I think us being involved is really important.
Yeah, that's a great call out, Chris. And I think the individual participation form linked was in the email I forwarded to everybody earlier today. I think, and I will confirm this after Tuesday's session, I think that form is going to remain open for some time. So maybe what we do is after the February meeting, when we coalesce around what are the kind of key strategic priorities, I'll ask each of us in our individual capacities to go and complete the form. And then I will take the action item to give testimony on behalf of the commission writ large in March, that we, to your point, we're really escalating what we deem to be important. Before we move on from this, is there anything else folks can think of top of mind that might be critical for us to include as ancillary to our work?
And how many open positions are there in your office?
We have one position, one FTE that's open.
What is it advertised now? Is there any appetite for that, or?
Possibly. We don't have a hiring freeze or anything like that. We're looking at possibly classifying that position or trying to decide what to do with it.
Okay, so just put some thought to it. We'll regroup in February on it. At this point in the meeting, I'd like to shift to executive session. Anna, actually, hang on one second. I'm going to jump ahead because we do have a member of the public on the line. I'm going to go out of sequence on our agenda, and I will open it up for any public comment. And Amy, I welcome you to come off mute and share anything or introduce yourself if you'd like to at this point in the meeting.
Thank you. That's okay. I'm just observing for the first time, but I appreciate it.
Excellent. Okay, Amy, we're going to go in executive session for a little while, and then we're going to come back into open session. So you're welcome, hang on or dial back in about 10 or 15 minutes if you'd like.
Yeah, we'll have to remove her if Stephen's going to participate.
Yeah.
Probably we'll have to remove Amy.
Okay, can we put Amy in the waiting room and then readmit her once we're out of it?
I don't.
I'm just gonna head off and I'll check back in later if I want.
Sorry, I
Thank
don't
you.
think we have a.
Don't worry about
Thank you, Amy.
it. Okay, bye.
Uh,